look, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's call. Absolutely honored to have Jane join us and share a little bit her transition story from corporate to scale-up CEO. Jane, huge welcome. I'll give a little intro in a minute, but it's so beautiful to see you, and best regards to Greystones and Dublin. I was home for the first time in 2 years, about a month ago. Yeah, I posted up on that. That was great to see mom and dad. Like, dad's not doing great, so it was kind of really nice to kind of go home and see how they're doing. So mom's got her 75th birthday at the end of August, so we'll take the kids home and spend some family time together there as well. So I'll let you know when we're in town.
I was going to say, let me know, we can meet up. That would be fun.
For sure. We'll do Dublin and then go down to Wexford.
Yeah.
But
well, I said in between, right?
Yeah, for sure.
On the way.
It's on the way. It's on the way. It's on the way. But I remember the first time we met, I interviewed you when I was doing this project with UNICEF in Prague. And you were GM with Microsoft there at the time. And we had a lovely conversation, and we kept in touch through Paris and Dublin and YPO. And I had you sit on our first virtual advisory board, which was amazing. So I got to work really closely with you and hear all the stuff you've been through. So look, I'm super honored that you're kind of the first in our leadership transition series. So delighted to have you for a little bit for ourselves today, Jane. But look, I suppose just to kick it off, maybe just, having had such an incredible kind of corporate early stage, and we'll kind of go through the transition and into CloudSphere as we go on, but maybe talk through a little bit that kind of corporate beginning, the learning experiences, favorite lessons from Google, from Microsoft, and then we can kind of just go into the other areas later on. And a huge welcome again.
Yeah, no, thank you. I know it's wild to think how long we've known each other. All right, pre your twins, pre my twins.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
The stories we can tell. So thank you for having me here. And hopefully I can, share a little bit that, will resonate with some folks that are on the call today. So, from a background perspective, I actually, I worked at Microsoft and Google for a number of years. In Microsoft over 12 years, and then Google for another almost 4, I think. And there are a couple of things that I look back. I mean, Microsoft is known as a management school of business in terms of how you run a business, what you learn, what you look for, the leading, the lagging indicators, scorecards, and I think one of the things that I learned there is kind of what good looks like and what good should look like. And I take that with, anything that I have done afterwards. When I went to Google, I took a lot of my learning from Microsoft, but let's be clear, culture was another big thing in terms of learning. Cultures at Microsoft and cultures at Google, completely different. And understanding the way culture works and how to get things done through very different cultures is important. As I like to say, when I went to Google and I started looking around asking, so do you have a scorecard, dashboard, how do you measure things? People just kind of looked at me like, she's going to come in with all this process and stuff. And I was like, no, but we have to have a better way of understanding how the business is running. So that's what I mean, like, taking that management school, but adjusting to the culture, because I would have been, thrown off the roof down in Grand Canal Docks if I had tried to come in with a real Microsoft approach. So, and what's also cool is learning, again, on the culture side, how each one worked, creating those very strong cultures that they have that people love working with. So I was fortunate to be able to experience 2 very different cultures, but also take the pieces that, I thought resonated the most to me to what I'm doing now at CloudSphere. So those are some of the things that I learned from, being at the big Microsoft and Googles over the years.
And maybe just to dovetail into that, Jane, a little bit off script, but when you were like hiring execs into your team in CloudSphere, like what are you looking at in terms of a candidate coming from corporate, a candidate coming from something entrepreneurial, something scale up? I mean, maybe just talk us through your eyes on them, what's important and what stands out, or even the risk in taking purely someone from corporate. I'd love to hear a little bit on that bit.
Oh yeah, because I have to look in the mirror, right? And say, wait, and then I'm like, but I did startups before I went
Yeah.
to Microsoft. So, but it has it, a lot of it is when and I do interview most people that come into the company, and I am looking for those from their entrepreneurial bent. Are they a builder or are they a sustainer? And you need both in a company, don't get me wrong, but when you're in a large company, it's very easy to be a sustainer, right, in terms of keeping the trains running on time and those types of things, which is incredibly important. But usually in a startup, in a scale up, you're looking more for those folks that can build things, that love to build things, are not afraid when everything's broken or non-existent. And there's a level of resilience that comes with that too. But teamwork is hugely important to me. One of the things that I look for when I'm talking to people is, how do they work? How do they work in stressful times? Do they hunker down? Do they, ask for help? Because you always have more that you to do than what you have resources for. And things don't go according to plan. And so how are people going to react or respond in those environments? But resilience is one of those things that I think is really important, because you're trying to figure out, do I have the right business model? Is this the right functionality, right product fit, right positioning? And then when you think you got it right, then something external happens and the market shifts and changes, and so then you're like scratching your head and adjusting, and so you have to be agile and be able to pivot pretty quickly too.
That's fantastic. It's like the Mike Tyson quote, like, everybody has a plan till you get a punch in the face or something.
Yeah.
It's a great
Yep.
I love that.
And how do you jump back up very quickly, right?
Exactly. And guys, just keep popping questions in the chat, and we'll go to you guys once we go through it. So just pop questions in the chat so I know who wants to jump in with a question. Jane, maybe talking then about the finishing in corporate, the end of the corporate experience. How can you prepare yourself for that if you're going to go through it again, or advise somebody who's exiting a corporate and looking to go into something different, entrepreneurial, private equity backed, scale up? What would be your shared experience or guiding experiences or recommendations there?
So I was fortunate that I had a mentor that sat down when I was saying, I always had, so when I left Microsoft, my N+1, and I don't know if that's just a Microsoft term or not, but it's like what you want to do after that next job. So
Okay.
I knew it's like, okay, I'm going to go to Google to get experience that can show I can work outside of Microsoft, which is important because you kind of get pigeonholed. And I wanted to have digital transformation. And while I'd done some of that at Microsoft, really going to Google, I thought would give that to me. But it was all because my N+1, my Google, the job after Google, I always had dreamt about being a CEO. And when I was the GM of Microsoft Czech Republic, I was a mini CEO, right? Within the constraints of the larger company. And that was like a pivotal experience for me that put me on a track that this is ultimately what I want to do. And so, in thinking through that and talking to my coach, she challenged me on like, well, what does that look like? Like, what's your decision criteria? And so in an objective time frame, not in the heat of having conversations, but really a year before I even left Google, I was identifying and writing out what I thought good looked like for me and what that next role was, whether it be the softer skills, the culture, that side of things, as well as the harder skills on, what the actual tech was and what it solved, which was helpful because then, you're not in the middle of it all, trying to make a decision and trying to, write your plan at the same time. So going through that. And then the other thing that I did, which was really scary, was I said, you know what, I don't have the time to do and excel at my job and go out and network and do all the things that I needed to do. And so that's when I said, I'm going to step away from my job and I'm going to take the time and give myself the time to be able to explore and figure out who I am and what I wanted to do. That was the scarier piece, figuring out kind of line item, because when you and I first were talking, I was talking to private equity and venture capital. They're so different. But it was also fun because I just explored and I talked to different people. And then I had to look myself in the mirror and say, you know what, you're not the number crunching person that PE firms want. They want change, people to come in and do change, but they also, the way they run their business is very different than a venture capital backed investment. And that's more akin to who I am in personality. But I kind of had to walk through those shoes and really, get a feel for it and ask the silly questions to land on the fact of, I think I'm better prepared to be a venture capital type of CEO.
I think it's a super interesting viewpoint there, Jane. And maybe if you could expand a little bit, because I think some of the people in the community will really appreciate hearing that difference as they step out of something corporate, looking at, I think, oh, PE is where I want to go, but maybe kind of venture back is a little bit is a different reality and maybe more akin to where their skills lie. Maybe talk a little bit through, if you could expand a little bit on that, and then talk a little bit into the, you went into it in such an open way, but also some of the challenging experiences that you were dealing with for the first time.
Yeah. And I'm no expert on PE versus venture capital, but I think when you're going into a PE environment, typically you're being funded by a firm that has their criteria in terms of profitability, which drives a majority of the decisions. And I believe in profitable companies and the like, but from a cost cutting or cost management side of things, that's not where my brain usually goes. And the deeper conversations that I would have, that became more of the point that we would land on. And then I was just like, that's just not me. I don't have a finance background. It's not the place that I go to. Now, that doesn't say they're not looking for strategic business leaders. There are, but a lot of the conversations were around profitability. So on the venture capitalist side, yes, they want a profitable business to be successful. Absolutely. The runway is different. The path to get there is different. And typically you're either, because I wasn't coming in as a founder asking for funding. So I was coming in to provide some type of change management with, a certain view of the length of time that I would have to do that. And it probably, because I did startups, it seemed more comfortable for me because I kind of understood how it would work better than on the PE side. But I love the opportunity that I was able to talk to so many different types of companies and in firms to understand where I think I would fit better.
Fantastic. And Jane, maybe talk to us a little bit how you worked on your visibility, how you got out there. I mean, a lot of these were new contacts for you that you didn't have from the past. So just curious that disciplined approach to, knocking on doors.
Yeah. Actually, a good friend of mine asked me this, and funnily enough, I just I blocked out time every morning that this was my work time. And then because I had to make sure I gave myself the freedom. If I was taking this time off, I needed to spend time with my friends, my family, do some traveling, read some books, as well as try to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. So blocking time as best as possible, because otherwise you'll stress out about anything and everything. And so, identifying when I was going to do my work was one of the things that I did. And now I just lost my train of thought. Your question again, Mark? Sorry.
It was on the disciplined approach to building out that external network in PE, VC, and just knocking on doors.
Knocking on doors. So one of the things that I did is I went out and researched the top recruiting firms, the top PE firms, top VCs, and I would look at their boards and who do I know, who don't I know, and leverage. And I took the attitude that I could be solving somebody's problem. And so they probably want to get to know me because I could probably help solve some of their problems that they had. So versus you going in and saying, can you help me? It was the opposite of, this is how I can help you. And so I tended to do a bit of homework. I also went out and looking at startups and companies that were getting invested and, identified my international experience and the number of product launches that I did. And those were two things that differentiated me in the marketplace. And so I would lead with those. when I was reaching out and talking to someone. Do you have a problem with this? I might be able to help. Or I just saw that you acquired this company, change management, integration. This is how, this is experience I have that I might be able to help you if you're needing any assistance.
Fantastic, fantastic. No, I think it is just getting into as many conversations as possible, isn't it? Was there any kind of curveball conversations or something you didn't expect was going to lead anywhere that was like, oh my God, that was just a wonderful experience?
Yeah, so most of them. So I always want, it's the same thing I ask my kids after they play any type of match. Did you have fun? And what did you learn? And I kind of, that's an inner dialogue that I have with myself. It's like after every meeting, maybe not fun, but was it a good conversation? Kind of what did you learn? And I should pull out my notebook, because after every conversation, I had notes of, had the conversation go and what did I learn about myself? And that also helped me refine more and more what I wanted to do, the types of people I wanted to work with. But it is a journey, right? There were some interesting, what was interesting is, I was talking to not large corporates, but I still was talking to corporates because everybody they were like, yeah, you worked at Microsoft, Google. That was where people would push me down the path. Yep. And I was open to talk to anybody because you never know who they might know and make introductions. And the reason why I'm the CEO of CloudSphere is because of that. I met a member of the board through, and he called me up one day and said, hey, I have a question for you. Would you be interested in doing something along these lines? And I was like, absolutely. And so that's how I got introduced to the chairman, and fast forward to becoming the CEO. So it was serendipity.
Yeah, being open to multiple conversations. It is quite interesting how for many people it's like shutting the door on corporate, but the lesson is there. Look, maybe don't shut it fully. There can still be some very interesting conversations that can take you somewhere else. That's very interesting.
And it could be short term or long term.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and I think even at the time you were open for advisory board, for non-exec. I mean, you're just open for interesting conversations.
Yeah. And hopefully I pay that back too, right? With people that I've met through the time and connect the dots. I was talking to a guy who has a startup here in Ireland, and he was talking to me about his idea, and I was like, wait a minute, this sounds like it probably could work with a company that's in the US that's in health tech. And I was like, yeah, I'm happy to make the introduction. I don't know if it'll work, but it's just like, and I hadn't talked to him in 12 months. Yep. Right. And I just, dropped a note and just said, hey, I think there might be some interesting tech here for you. I'll leave it to you guys to talk. Where it'll go, I have no idea. But it's like he was nice enough to spend time with me, give me some great advice about the market, what was happening, and so
always connecting, Jane.
Yeah,
always connecting. Hey, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Olivier, I'll come to you first, and then John. So, guys, if you get ready, we'll pull you guys up in a second. And Jane, just on the that voyage going through the multiple conversations, the reach outs. Were there? I had one of the questions. Any regrets with any roles that either like you said no to, or that you were rejected for? Going, oh shit, that could have been fun.
I'm not a person who has regrets. So that's the one thing. It's just kind of because I feel it's all about the bigger experience. Yep. in the like. Was there one that I like to say cried to my Cheerios over? I fully believe I landed in the right place. I have an amazing board, an amazing chairman, and my team is awesome. And so I feel good. I think maybe if I didn't feel good where I was, then maybe I'd do more self-reflection on, that might have been a bit better fit. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting because COVID, right? That threw a spinner in everything. And so this is how you were meeting people. You weren't, when I was talking to most people, no one was traveling. You didn't hear an airplane. I wasn't allowed to go more than 5 kilometers from my house. So that was, to me, that was like, not being able to meet people is probably the toughest thing through my process.
And Jay, maybe give the guys a bit of a context on talk through kind of the CloudSphere what was in, what were the compelling reasons to take that role? I mean, that would be super interesting to hear. And then we'll go to Olivier and John and Ephraim for some questions.
Yeah, so I looked at everything from 2 points of view. One is on the more business side. So on the technical, saying, okay, what's the tech? Is the tech compelling? Is it defensible? Do I understand it well enough to be able to explain it to people? I'm an English literature major, the irony of being in tech my whole career. So that was the one thing, is like, is the tech compelling? Is the market opportunity big enough? Is it growing? And again, going back to the tech, and is the tech going to be something that I can differentiate in the market? And then the third was on the people side of things. I already mentioned that I have an amazing board. Being a first-time CEO, that was really, really important to me, that I knew I'd have people that would be able to pick me up if I needed to be picked up, give me a hard time when I need to be given a hard time. And they take work assignments from me. I'm constantly giving them work, things that I may not be able to give my team for confidentiality reasons, whatever the case may be. And so that was really, really important to me. And then, on the softer side of things, culture, values, making sure that it was in alignment with who I am and the way I like to work, or how much adjustment can I do coming in as a CEO working in a virtual environment? Probably not a lot. So there are those softer skill things that I know culturally where I thrive and where I don't. And I thought those would be there as well, with a little tweaking around the edges on some things too, though. What would I do differently? Probably, actually, I know what I would do differently. That's a good question. I think
Olivier is one of the best CHROs in the world, so this is like a real he's had this question up his sleeve for a long time, Jane. Don't give him any extra credit.
Yeah, no, it's
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, during the process, I think and there was so much uncertainty with COVID. I think I probably, was a little stressed out every now and again, right? Personally, I put too many miles on running. So I pulled a hamstring doing that. But I'm kind of being funny, but it was just like my check and my balance, at times, like all of us, it's good or it's not so good. And so making sure I pulled myself back to that. But I think, when I started as the CEO of CloudSphere, trying to get ramped up to speed and everything like that, I probably went too much inside. And that limited the time that I could work with Mark and VAB and stuff like that, because there was just so much going on that I was trying to learn. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? And so it's you have your first 90 days that you go in and you're immersing yourself, sure, but then it's like, what are the 3 big rocks that I like to call them, problems that you're going to try to solve, how you're going to solve them, and the like. But I think that's also a little bit of my personality. I'm 110% in. And so I went 110% in, and then it was like, okay, I need to pull myself back out to make sure I'm more balanced across the board. Because this literally, so I have a stand-up desk. I'd be on calls at 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. And I do have a stool for when I get tired to sit on, but I mean, that's intense when you went from having a few hours a day of phone calls, maybe, depending, some days more or less, to then going completely, Zoom back to back to back. That was pretty intense. I don't know, I don't know how I could have really done it differently, but maybe pulled my head up and pulled back a little earlier. So, to have that networking, going and talking to more people outside. But it was it was intense. But I think COVID also, it makes it even more intense, because all you're doing is, jumping on a video call. You don't have that downtime of walking from one meeting room to another, jumping in your car to drive someplace, that you get that, kind of peace of mind sitting at a stoplight, doing a couple of deep breaths as you're preparing for your next meeting. Fantastic. So hopefully that answers your question. So I actually haven't done PE yet. Maybe I will. But I can talk, it's similar for a CEO job, right? It's like, how do you get the first? And it was a network. So if you look at my board, my chairman is ex-Microsoft, and one of my Neds is ex-Microsoft. So I knew my Ned, Joe and I were peers at Microsoft, so we knew each other quite well. And the chairman worked at Microsoft, actually was the boss of one of my bosses. And so there was a network effect that really came into place. And so they went and talked to people about me. I met with the rest of the board. Again, the gentleman, another member of the board that introduced me, wasn't the Microsoft guy, a different guy. And so it was really convincing the board that I was the right person, but they did a lot of homework. They did a lot of homework because they realized, again, it's the first time, right? You're a first-time CEO. How resilient are you going to be? Can you move from big corporate where everything is taken care of and built for you and ready to go into an environment that there may be nothing, or enough to get you started, but then how do you build, and what are your expectations, and are you going to be willing to pull up, roll up your sleeves and do the heavy lifting or sweeping the corners, as all Blacks like to say. There was a little bit of a
you're only looking after the jersey.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just kind of, and so that's where I was fortunate. So honestly I didn't go out looking for Microsoft people on boards that I knew. That's probably something.
The strategy.
Yeah, a strategy in hindsight, as we're having this conversation, is that because then they know you're a trusted soul. Obviously, people that you work well with, that would and so many people that you work with, I'm sure, are sitting on boards. So in boards of PE firms. So then how do you leverage those relationships? My network, leveraged it, probably not as much as I could have. But the one thing is that anybody I reached out to, they were more than willing to help. And I think that's the coolest thing. People want to help. It's usually we're shy about asking for the help. Now, I did have some feedback very early on with a guy that I worked with at Microsoft. He told me I was going too broad. And this is the PEVC thing. And I'm like, but I don't know which path to go down yet. But he was like, you're being too broad in terms of who you are and what you want to do. You need to be much more narrow. But he also had, from his career was more vertical and mine was more horizontal. So like, I'm a generalist, full stop. And if you tried to put me into a CMO role today, I couldn't do it because I haven't done that in 10 years. 10 years ago, that would have made sense. But so I have a very generalist mentality, which is what I entered into my transition into, whereas John is his name. John, very vertical, specific career. And he was like, you're going too broad. People won't want to talk to you. And that's when I came up with, okay, my differentiator is international, an American who's been successful living outside of the US for 15 years. And I have over 200 product launches behind me. So I kind of know how to do that. And so those were and actually there was a third in terms of transformation to the cloud from a strategic perspective, because I led that at Microsoft for everything outside of the US and Canada. So there was, and that actually the PE companies really liked the transformational conversation. So again, depending upon who I was talking to, I pulled out a different story based upon the homework I did. But again, kind of your main point was, did I leverage my network enough? No. But anybody I reached out to was willing to help. But there's also only so, like there are only so many hours in a day, and you're trying to manage all the connections, because as soon as you reach out, you have to think of the multiplier effect of phone calls and emails that come back to you and trying to be responsive. So that there is a balance there. So unlearn playbooks, right? So Microsoft was really big in playbooks, and it's like, you know, here's your playbook, 250 pages, go and do it. I actually, when I was working at Microsoft in the Czech Republic, already started doing this type of stuff, saying, you know, a playbook that's set up for the UK business doesn't work for the Czech business. I need a playbook. So like when I would be thinking of playbooks and how things should run, because of how they ran at Google or Microsoft or other places, that's not the way they run in startups and in small companies. It's much more agile. You have fewer resources. So it's really saying, what are the few things that I have to get done, and how can I do them as quickly and easily as possible? I'm a huge be work person, or 80% gets you there. So you're not thinking that you have to be 100% to get a product out the door, or 100% to get the messaging out, being able to roll with it, where you wouldn't do that in a large corporate environment. You know, there's more oversight and expectations, whereas being a startup, if they're working from a tech perspective with you, they know that it's not going to be 100%, and you set that expectation. It's kind of tough for a Microsoft or a Google to roll out a product that they're like, yeah, it's about 80% there. Whereas it's much better, you know, in a startup environment, you have those relationships with the partners. There's an expectation that can be set. So you're design partnering together. Leadership. And leadership is a tricky one because everybody defines it differently. And it's a bunch of things that come together. But that's the feedback that my board has given me. So it's their answer, not mine. But that's, you know, when times are tough, that's when real leaders show up, right? And so that kind of ties into the resilience, the comment that I made earlier. But there's still so much for me to learn. I could not, but that's what comes to mind. Again, it's because of the feedback I received from my board on how they see me showing up with my team. Trying to figure out who I am and what differentiated me. And it's really difficult, or I found it really difficult, looking in the mirror and saying, what am I good at? And so I asked people, you know, what stands out to you about me and my background? Because for me, it's just like, yeah, I've lived in a bunch of places. I've dealt with a lot of international stuff, like, but that's just me. That's Jane Gilson. It's not a big deal. And it's like, oh, but there are companies that are wanting to expand into Europe, and they want the international experience. Or there are companies, like in my case, that want to expand more into the US. And I understand the way the rest of the world works. And because I'm American, I understand Americans, kind of. So, you know, it's like I could bring those two things together, and I could state examples, which is real. And again, these are things that I just thought were normal until somebody pointed out to me, no, that's, you know, that is not normal, Jane. Not everybody has that experience. It's probably something important, and it's something I enjoy. I love cultures. I love bringing the best of different cultures together. And yeah, I also know some of the idiosyncrasies of different countries I've lived in, and, you know how to work around them too. Yeah, so that was important. And then on, you know, the product side, just because of my background and what, again, most VCs are looking for, they're looking for people that understand product and how to take product to market. Again, one of those things that I was like, oh, okay, I thought that was normal. It's like, well, you've actually been able to launch a ton of products in startups as well as in big companies. And so understanding how that goes, and how to work in a go-to-market through channels, selling direct, that they thought would, but I leveraged people that knew me, that to give me feedback on what they thought I was good at. And what they thought would differentiate me. So like talking to Mark, for example, people that can look at your background from an objective perspective and tie to what they know the market is looking for, because you don't always know that. And so something that is you may not play up could be really, really, really important in what's going on in an industry.
Thanks, Kirill. Jane, I'm going to go to Mike in a minute, but just one question I wanted to ask. You know, like getting the job is one thing, So look, that's great, box tick. And then you got to actually be successful. So maybe talk through a little bit the first 90 days and, getting that, and again, through COVID, getting that team together and getting impact and performance.
Yeah. So, I went around and talked to people, and tried to understand, what was working, what wasn't working, what should we do differently, is just the way I start a conversation. And mission, vision, values, communications, some of the fundamentals needed to be refreshed or done. Right. So doing a mission, vision, values, and Mark and I've talked about doing that over Zoom, I was scared to death to do. I was just like, I don't think this is going to work. And, we were in multiple locations in the US, here in Ireland and India. And I'm like, time zone wise, how are we going to make it? How do I make sure everybody's going to engage and participate? And I spent a lot of time thinking through how to do it. And it actually worked because I had prep work beforehand and the like. And so setting up and getting that, and that was part of the teamwork exercise too, right? Because the company had come together through a merger. And so not everybody had actually met each other in person too. So it wasn't that I had never met anybody in person. People on the leadership team hadn't either. And so how do you build that trust? The trust with the team, how do you get them to participate? And did homework beforehand, leverage Zoom pretty well in terms of the chat boxes and stuff like that, so people could enter stuff. Then we have leveraged the Amazon quiet time, so everybody could read something, reflect on it, give comments. So those were the things that I did. But it was, it was trial by error too, and asking for feedback, what's working, what's not working, and when people weren't participating, why aren't they participating, and pulling them in.
Just, I suppose, looking back, Jane, kind of through your own transition and having talked to many people who've gone through it, what would be your kind of imparting words of wisdom? And you've touched on some of the points on the call already.
Yeah.
But what guidance would you give, or shared experience, or top tips would you recommend to people who are going through their own transition at the moment?
Talk to anybody and everybody. Don't close doors, because you just don't know. And that kind of is the open-mindedness of where you want to go, but know who you are. I guess starting with knowing who you are, what you want to do, and the fit from a cultural fit perspective and from a business fit perspective. I had the benefit of doing that first because some really smart person told me to do that, and I followed her lead, and I think it helped, because then when I was in the middle of, I actually had 2 different offers I was looking at. And I could objectively say, okay, which one fits me better between the 2? And yeah, so that would be, but I mentioned before, I got feedback that I was being too broad, and it's like, okay, that's great feedback. Doesn't mean I have to take it, because I didn't know enough to say, I want to shut down this path or that path, at that time. So not the most articulate answer, but
no. Look, that's perfect. Look, it is, and look, we always say, look, you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince. I think it is those. It's only by those conversations and you might even enter the transition thinking, this is where I want to go, right. But through those feedback and those conversations, you know what, that's actually maybe not quite right. So,
and people were presenting opportunities to me that I was like, this totally isn't me. And what you get on a piece of paper versus the conversations that you go into can completely shift. Because even some of the PE firms that I was talking to in the US, they were like, we need transition people. We need people to help transition. They are having a hard time figuring out because then that puts you into a PE staff role, and how would that work and stuff like that. But and then I was like, oh, well, would I want to do that for a living? And I was like, can I be on the outside of the window looking in? Or do I want to be on the inside looking out? And that was another thing that I had to process. I like being operational, hands-on, not more consultative, coming in for 90 days and making an assessment and moving on. That's probably I think it sounds like a cool, amazing job, but probably isn't the one for me. Yeah. So those are some of the other just experiences and thoughts just by talking to people.
preparing yourself for interviews, like, people who've gone through, 20-year, 25-year corporate career haven't interviewed. I mean, they've interviewed more people than they've been interviewed themselves by like a significant scale. So I'm just wondering, is there any kind of going back into that interview process? What were your kind of learnings or recommendations there, saying, hey, there is an element of, look, you almost have to get like fit again for interviews if you're not in that frame of mind. So I'm just wondering, was there anything that kind of, any guidance or shared experience there? And that's the last question.
Yeah, and so I took calls that I wasn't interested in to build that muscle, right? So, and then I asked for feedback, because it's, so what do you think? What do you find interesting about my background and stuff like that? Not did I interview well, but asking, what did you find interesting tells me if they heard my story. And so I asked for feedback. But it's not easy taking the time. So before the interview is as critical as during the interview in terms of preparing for it yourself mentally, whether you go for a walk, whatever your ritual is to get you ready to go into the interview. Like right now, I don't know how I would ever do an interview sitting down again. Like, cause I stand all the time, like, and eventually I'm going to have to do a board meeting sitting down, which is going to be weird for me because I'm just not used to doing it. So creating that ritual, whatever that ritual is. And then I do the self-assessment afterwards in terms of, was it a good conversation? What did I learn? Just so I reflect to then move on, not to beat myself up at all, just to like, hey, did I have fun? Did I enjoy the person I was talking to? And then what did I learn in the conversation?
Fantastic. Jane, it's been so great to see you again. And thank you so much for sharing.